500,000 travelers are stranded, and Canada's national airline has essentially shut down, all because of an issue most passengers have never even heard of. But here's where it gets controversial. Should flight attendants get paid for the work they do before takeoff? Canada's aviation giant grinds to a complete halt, in an unprecedented move that's sending shockwaves through the aviation industry. Air Canada, the country's premier airline, has completely ceased operations and scrapped all financial projections after 10,000 flight attendants boldly rejected a federal mandate to return to work. Let's break this down in simple terms. Imagine being told by your government that you must go back to work, and then collectively saying absolutely not. The numbers that tell the shocking story. Here's what this labor standoff has actually cost in real terms. Complete suspension of Air Canada's financial guidance for both quarterly and annual projections. Total flight cancellations implemented indefinitely as of Monday. More than 2,300 flights scrapped in just 7 days. That's roughly 1,153 domestic routes and 1,165 international connections. According to aviation analytics firm Cirium, an estimated 500,000 passengers left scrambling for alternative travel arrangements. Over 550 additional flight cancellations logged on Monday alone, based on FlightAware tracking data. Air Canada's stock price tumbling more than 1.5% by early Monday afternoon. But here's what most people don't realize about how we got to this point. The timeline that led to aviation chaos. The roots of this crisis stretch back to March 31st, when Air Canada's collective bargaining agreement with its flight attendants officially expired. After 8 grueling months of negotiations that went absolutely nowhere, the flight attendants walked off the job at 1 a.m. on Saturday. The Canadian government's response was swift. Within just 12 hours, they stepped in and requested that the Canada Industrial Relations Board, CIRB, impose binding arbitration to resolve the dispute. By Sunday, the CIRB had issued a direct order for flight attendants to return to their duties immediately. And this is the part most people miss. The flight attendants, represented by the Canadian Union of Public Employees, CUPE, looked at that government order and essentially said, "Thanks, but no thanks." This defiance forced Air Canada to abandon its plans to restart operations on Sunday and cancel every single Monday flight. The stalemate that has everyone asking questions. So when will this end? The honest answer is that nobody knows. And that's what makes this situation so unprecedented. Air Canada officials have publicly condemned the work stoppage as completely illegal. Meanwhile, the flight attendants are showing zero signs of backing down. CUP National President Mark Hancock made their position crystal clear to reporters gathered at Toronto's Pearson International Airport. "Our members are not going back to work. We're saying no." Video footage from Pearson Airport on Monday captured flight attendants chanting, "Don't blame me, blame AC," a message that reveals just how deeply entrenched both sides have become. What this means for stranded passengers. If you're one of the unfortunate travelers caught in this mess, here's what Air Canada is telling you. All Air Canada and Air Canada Rouge flights are cancelled due to CUP's actions. Please do not head to the airport as flights are not operating. The airline is offering some relief by allowing passengers with tickets for travel between now and August 22nd to reschedule at no additional cost for any date between August 23rd and September 30th. But that's cold comfort for travelers with urgent business or family commitments. The real issue that's dividing everyone, boarding pay. Here's where this story gets really interesting and controversial. The central battle isn't about salary increases or vacation time. It's about something called boarding pay, and it's an issue that exposes a dirty little secret of the airline industry that most passengers have never considered. Let me explain this in terms anyone can understand. When you board an airplane, flight attendants are already working. They're helping passengers find seats, stowing luggage, conducting safety checks, preparing the galley. and giving safety demonstrations. But here's the kicker. Most airlines worldwide, including Air Canada, only start paying flight attendants when the aircraft doors close for departure. Think about that for a moment. These safety professionals are performing critical duties, but they're essentially working for free during one of the most chaotic and demanding parts of their job. Sarah Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, AFA, which represents over 50,000 flight attendants across 20 airlines, didn't mince words in her statement supporting the Air Canada workers. It's time for a fair deal, including the new industry standard of boarding pay and other time currently unpaid at work. She went even further, claiming that Air Canada pays a poverty wage for the work of aviation's first responders, and that has to change. But here's where it gets controversial. Is this really about fair compensation, or are unions overreaching at the expense of travelers? Government response and the political implications. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney addressed the situation on Monday, calling the negotiation breakdown disappointing and highlighting the massive disruption affecting literally hundreds of thousands of Canadians and visitors to our country. Interestingly, Carney seemed to walk a diplomatic tightrope, acknowledging the critical role that flight attendants play in keeping Canadians and their families safe as they travel, while noting it's important that they're compensated equitably. But critics might ask, if the government believes flight attendants deserve fair compensation, why did they order them back to work before addressing their core concerns? The American perspective, a tale of changing standards. To understand how revolutionary this boarding pay demand really is, let's look at what's happening south of the border. The shift in U.S. airline policies reveals just how contentious this issue has become industry-wide. Delta Airlines broke new ground in 2022 by becoming the first major U.S. carrier to compensate flight attendants for boarding time, albeit at 50% of their regular hourly rate. Notably, this decision came as Delta was trying to prevent its flight attendants from unionizing. Delta remains the only major U.S. airline without unionized flight attendants, which raises its own questions about motivation. Following Delta's lead, American Airlines and Alaska Airlines both implemented boarding pay at half the regular rate this year, but only after extended and difficult contract negotiations with their unions. United Airlines actually reached a tentative agreement that included boarding pay, but their flight attendants rejected the deal, leaving United workers still unpaid for boarding duties. Southwest Airlines has maintained its position of not paying for boarding time. According to U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data, the median wage for American flight attendants was $67,130 last year. But this figure doesn't account for all the unpaid time spent on boarding duties. The controversial questions everyone should be asking. This situation raises some uncomfortable questions that the airline industry and travelers need to confront. 1. If flight attendants are performing safety-critical duties during boarding, why shouldn't they be compensated for that time? 2. Are passengers unknowingly benefiting from what essentially amounts to free labor from airline staff? 3. Should governments have the power to force workers back to their jobs when labor disputes involve fundamental questions of fair compensation? 4. If airlines can afford to pay executives millions in bonuses, why is paying flight attendants for all their working hours such a controversial concept? 5. Are unions justified in defying government orders when they believe workers' rights are at stake? Or does this set a dangerous precedent that prioritizes labor disputes over public service? Here's what I think might be the most provocative question of all. In an industry where safety is supposedly paramount, how can airlines justify not paying the very people responsible for passenger safety during some of the most critical moments of flight preparation? The bigger picture, what this means for the future of air travel. This Air Canada situation isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a broader reckoning in the airline industry about worker compensation, passenger rights, and the balance of power between corporations, unions, and government regulators. The fact that 10,000 flight attendants were willing to defy their own government's direct order suggests this issue runs much deeper than a simple pay dispute. It reflects a fundamental disagreement about the value of airline workers and their contributions to the travel experience. But here's where it gets really interesting. If Air Canada eventually caves and agrees to boarding pay, it could trigger a domino effect across the global airline industry. Other flight attendant unions will undoubtedly point to this precedent in their own negotiations. Conversely, if the government ultimately forces flight attendants back to work without addressing their core concerns, it might signal that workers' rights take a back seat to economic convenience, a message that could have far-reaching implications beyond just the aviation sector. So, here's my question for you. Do you think flight attendants deserve to be paid for all the work they do on your behalf, even if it means higher ticket prices? Or do you believe that keeping air travel affordable justifies the current system where some airline duties go uncompensated? And perhaps more importantly, when workers feel so strongly about an issue that they're willing to defy government orders and strand 500,000 passengers, shouldn't we at least be asking whether their concerns might be legitimate? What's your take on this situation? Are these flight attendants heroes standing up for workers' rights, or are they putting their own interests ahead of public service? The comment section is the perfect place to share your thoughts. And don't be surprised if your fellow travelers disagree with you.